Be ready. Five seconds. Start. Mr. Deputy Chairman, I support the motion for reference of the bill to a joint select committee. I heartily welcome the provisions of this measure meant to ameliorate the conditions of workers in the road transport industry. This industry has tremendously increased in recent times, so much so that even railways are afraid of competition from road transport in carrying goods and passengers for long distances. We have made enactments for all the big industries. We have got separate legislation for plantations, for coal, and for others to protect the wages and to provide good working conditions to the workers employed in those industries. Because of the expanding nature of this industry, this bill was necessary and is most welcome. While welcoming this measure, I would like to make some observations on the clauses for the consideration of the Joint Select Committee. With regard to Clause 1 dealing with definitions, the provisions of this bill apply only to those undertakings which employ more than 10 workers. Under certain circumstances, it can be extended to those undertakings which employ even 5 workers. I know that the government have their difficulties in applying the provisions to each individual working in this industry, and that has got to be appreciated. But we have got a fear that this might lead to fragmentation of some of the bigger units. We have got before the House a bill to amend the Plantations Labour Act, brought before the House only for making a provision to check fragmentation of tea gardens. So that tendency is there, the tendency to break law even among the big ones. Therefore, I suspect that this provision is likely to be misused by some undertakings, and there might be a tendency for fragmentation. I am glad that my friend Mr. Verma has just suggested that an attempt should be made to make viable units. Of course, there are many transport cooperative societies working at present, and there is a tendency to operate these services on a cooperative basis. To avoid any misuse of the Act, my request to the Honorable Minister would be that this bill should be made applicable to everybody. This has got to be done, otherwise there will be fragmentation and there will be a tendency to employ 5 or less than 5 workers. Thousands of trucks and buses are running in the country which are working individually. Sir, I am glad that with regard to the other provisions, this bill has followed the Factories Act. I am glad that all the good provisions of the Factories Act have been incorporated in this bill at the very outset. We have got the experience that the provisions of the Factories Act were applied even in the case of mines after a long time. We had to wait for a long time even for the application of overtime rules under the Factories Act. I am glad that provisions relating to wages, hours of work, overtime, etc. have been made applicable, and that the workers in the road transport industry will have the advantage of all these facilities which have been allowed under the Factories Act from the start. I am, however, point out that in Chapter 5 dealing with hours and limitation of employment, provision has been made that workers could be relieved after rendering 10 hours duty. This provision appears to me to be extraordinary. I know the difficulties of the road transport industry. The conditions of working are quite different from ordinary factories. They have to work all the 24 hours, and it is very difficult to stipulate anything so far as hours of work are concerned. But still, I may submit that nowhere, in no industry, the working hours prescribed are more than 9 hours. So, This will have to be taken into consideration while considering the working hours of workers in the road transport industry. With regard to Chapter 7, Wages and Leave, I am glad that provision for overtime has been made in accordance with the Factories Act. I have to observe that though Clause 29 of this bill is a copy of Section 79 of the Factories Act, some of the explanations and provisions which have been made only to clarify the position and not to add to the facilities or advantages have been omitted. The provisions are about the system of estimates of wages, etc. Those provisions may also be included in the present bill. Then, sir, some observations were made by some honorable members. One of them was that the Payment of Wages Act does not apply to these workers. I submit that it does not apply and clause 27 of this bill provides for it. There were some other observations also that some other facilities like health insurance and other things have not been provided. I hope that the State Insurance Act will be made applicable to the workers. If it is not applicable or if it cannot be applied in the present form, necessary amendment may be made. Sir, the State Trading Corporation came into existence 3 years ago when the opinion in the country was very much divided. There were many doubting elements who shouted and cried that the state was embarking on an adventure which should be the close preserve of private enterprise. All these people represented the world of vested interests, but the organization was ushered in spite of their criticism of their adverse reaction, in a healthy climate of goodwill because there were also many in the country who thought that such an organization would be able to introduce a new healthy trend in our trade and commerce and that it would help us to build our trade international and national. So, sir, we have this organization for the last 3 or 4 years, and we have to look at and judge the career of this small baby which we have ushered into the economy of our country. Sir, I have looked at all the three reports produced by the corporation, and I was very much disappointed to find that the achievements of this organization during this period have been pitifully small. It has belied our expectations. It has defeated our hopes and desires. Sir, in the first year of its performance, this body has been able to trade to the extent of rupees 10 crores. In the second year, it has been increased to rupees 28 crores. In the third year, which we are reviewing, the achievement has gone further and there is a turnover of rupees 35 crores or so. These figures may signify a trend in the upward direction, a favorable trend, an expansionary growth of this organization. Sir, I think one of my friends on the opposite side pointed out that this organization has been embarking upon fresh fields and new areas which should have been conveniently left in the hands of the private people. May I draw his attention to the fact that with all this huge performance that it has to its credit, the organization has been able to control less than 31% of the trade and commerce in the country. It has got on its list of trade only 43 items among countless items which are left for the private enterprise. My complaint is not that the organization is taking up new fields and new areas and is encroaching upon the domain of the private people and industrialists, but that it has not been able to go sufficiently far so that it might play a vital role, significant and far-reaching part in building up the trade and commerce of this country. Sir, the report gives evidence of the fact that the organization has been able to do certain good things which I really appreciate, good things which would otherwise have been neglected if they had been entrusted to private hands. For instance, the organization has been able to utilize the neglected small ports. It has utilized these ports for the purpose of exporting mineral ores and other goods. Again, sir, the organization has been able to bring about a certain amount of coordination between rail, road and canal transport, and it has also been able to exploit the unutilized capacities of the various modes of transport.